Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Ag View Pitch. We are going to talk business today, and we're going to hit on topics such as financial, some of the tax situations, and we got Jarod Creed here with us today again to also talk about some of the commodity conditions, and we're going to lean on Paul. So Paul is kind of our resident tax expert that many of you know. He's out on the road today. I think he's in Sioux Falls now, heading for Minnesota, doing a bunch of speaking things. And we've got Jeremy Doetch with us, who a lot of you know, who we've had on a number of times to discuss lending and challenges. And we, in fact, Jeremy and I just released a 19 minutes here this morning that came out at 5 o'clock here this morning on the 29th, talking about a lot of things that lenders are probably going to be doing, and we'll talk about some of that stuff here today too. But I think what we want to do first is I'm going to pick on you, Jarod, and you kind of had the idea for this conversation and thought, well, we need to get a tax expert, a banker, and yourself and myself on here and have kind of a conversation on what things might look like in terms of opportunities, the rest of 24 and going into 25. So, Jarod, I'm going to have you kind of summarize what you think the conversation should look like today.
I think what stemmed the desire to have this conversation is maybe unfortunate times coming for some U.S. agriculture producers, but with unfortunate times for some comes opportunity for others. And I would like to think that your listeners, Chris, progressive operators, most of them are probably going to find themselves in a position in the next 12 to 24 months to grow the farm. And a lot of the nuts and bolts that are going to need to be addressed in the next couple of years are going to depend on individuals like Jeremy and Paul. You and I, as the cost analysis, the risk manager, so on and so on, we can only do so much, but we still need to play within the boundaries that ultimately our financial institution, tax implications, et cetera, kind of a 30,000 foot view conversation to drill it back down into what type of opportunities are coming and what we need to do about it to accomplish those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Great way to kind of tee us up here. Appreciate that. Jeremy, I want to start with you. And this will spark some thoughts from Paul then, I think, as well. But, when you think of where balance sheets were at 2 years ago, where working capital was at, and kind of what you saw because of 23, and there's still a lot of grain out there the way it sounds in 23. There are some people that are struggling, having some issues. Talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing on a 30,000 foot view. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you're seeing from a financial perspective?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Chris, as far as, working capital. I've been in a few ag downturns here, and the last one was coming off the super cycle of 2012/13 here, and we had a slower erosion to working capital, but it certainly was a deeper cut to working capital. The thing that I think for any producer that is held on to some grain here throughout the probably about a year ago up until about now, I think what I'm seeing across the board, from a balance sheet perspective, is just a tremendous amount of erosion to working capital. In the last 12 months, I think it's almost one of the faster erosions to working capital that I have seen in my lending career. So that poses a couple different challenges, and I've kind of got some notes here, and I guess for those that haven't put this assimilation together, if you listen to somebody like Dave Ramsey or Personal Finance, they always talk about having like 3 to 6 months of emergency funding, funds set aside, and I kind of look at working capital in a similar fashion, on the farm side. Is that this is really your staying power and your ability to, weather, the next 3, 4, 5 years. And so it's almost, it's almost a staying power. It's almost a purchasing power. If you want to, take advantage of assets, it's also, a little bit of an emergency fund for you, from that side of the balance sheet. And, what as that continues to erode, you've got a couple different options of that. You do a little bit better on the risk mitigation, stuff that Jarod can help you with, where you really need to recapitalize. And then the other, I guess, side to that on the long-term side of the balance sheet is that, there's a fair amount of operations here, I think, in the last, 4 years or so that may have recapitalized due to the favorable rates. And so, there's as we see erosion to working capital, we see interest rates go up, and, some equity that might have been harvested over the last 5 years, you certainly have got to, you really got to be sharp as to the moves you make, and how that affects your operation, your balance sheet, your purchase power, your relationship with the bank, and even, your tax planning. So I think it's, hopefully that summarizes a little bit of what I'm seeing on my side of it.
Mm-hmm. Paul, Jeremy was talking about some of the challenging sides of things you're seeing as many farmers as the rest of us all throughout the summer and things in your travels. Talk a little bit about what Jarod was bringing up. There's these operations that are going to be able to take advantage of some of the challenges that Jeremy just talked about. What are some of the things you're seeing? Are there some operations that are poised from your perspective, some that you're seeing?
Definitely. Essentially, this process of sort of good times and bad times in ag. Let's go back to the Bible. I mean, we had 7 good years followed by 7 bad years. And the people that during those 7 good years, or however many years we have good years, that bank that income and don't spend it, are the ones now they're going to be able to take advantage of the bad years over the next few years, or the maybe not so good years. Yes, I was talking to a farmer, I think 2 weeks ago, that's getting ready to buy some more ground. They have a bunch of capital that they have banked, and they're definitely taking advantage of people that are getting out of the business. And I think also with the older age of the farmer, I'm almost 65. I'm probably a young farmer these days in some situations. I think there's going to be more and more older farmers that, hey, we banked some good times, we're ready to get out of the business, and we want to turn it over to a good operation. And I think, Jeremy, one thing that I think I notice is if you have a farmer that has very good financial records, is instead of just giving you a simple tax return, they have a set of accrual basis financial statements. I think you're more likely to trust that farmer to know their numbers and be able to bank them versus somebody that all they have is basically a tax return and that's it. So I think for those farmers out there that have good financial records, have banked some money, there's going to be lots of opportunities in 25 and 26 and 27.
Comments, Jarod, on what you've heard so far?
Yeah, I would like to bring up maybe what I think is a very realistic situation out in the countryside. So I hope I don't overstep my knowledge, get over the edge of my skis here, but I look at the last 2 years, 2022 and 2023 are the most expensive crops we've ever planted. 2024, not very far behind. And about 2 years ago, U.S. farmer selling pace on the products they were producing started to slow down. And they went from being ahead of normal pace to behind normal pace. And that has exasperated itself in the last 24 months and gotten worse and worse and worse. So we find ourselves in a situation, in my opinion here, that many operators would have sat down with their accountant, sat down with their banker in December, January, this last cycle, got the renewals done. On their balance sheets, they would have had inventory well overstated from where today's markets are. And also at the end of the year, they had all this income coming in. So now they're tapping into their operating note to purchase equipment to avoid Uncle Sam. It's no secret what equipment has done in the last 6 months. Land values have, I don't know, maybe softened. It seems like most of the land that's been purchased in the last couple of years is in more solid hands. But now you fast forward to today, sitting on overpriced inventory on a balance sheet, basically bought a whole nother corn crop with the 2024 crop inputs, and soybeans for that matter, and have saw a massive decline in price since those purchases. And it's just all of a sudden like we're going to find ourselves this winter of how am I going to actually renew you for a standard operating note this winter? You've basically saw 2 crop years evaporate to the tune of at least $1 a bushel in corn, maybe $2 a bushel in beans, and that inventory that was, again, quote unquote, marked too high. How is that going to impact a lot of these producers' ability to get refinanced? When in my mind, I start to think, what equity do they actually have in today's environment, also at a higher interest rate, with softer equipment, with possibly softer land? What do they have to go out there and lean against? Or are they going to be finding themselves in a more of a high risk lending bucket that, okay, you can go get 8-9% today, but we might only be able to provide you 11 or 12% because of your financial strain. And I just think that 4 or 5 bullet points right there is probably a pretty common theme out in the industry. So I'd be curious to know Paul and Jeremy's thoughts on that.
Well, and I think one of my favorite sayings is working capital that you've paid tax on is your working capital. If you haven't paid tax on it, it's either Uncle Sam's or it's Jeremy's working capital. You got to keep borrowing. So yes, farmers don't like paying taxes, but remember, we want to optimize your tax situation. We want to take advantage of the lower tax brackets. If you don't want to pay self-employment tax, you can work with a CPA to get that down to a manageable number. So too many farmers, like Jarod says last year, hey, we're having a great year. We need to go out and buy equipment. Of course, they took that out of their working capital in a lot of situations. And now that piece of equipment that they paid $400,000 for is maybe worth $200,000 and they can't refinance it anyway. So yeah, it's just, you got to be prudent about having that working capital. As Jeremy says, excuse me, I wouldn't want even 6 months. I'd probably want 9 months of working capital if I can get that.
Comments, Jeremy?
I mean, I think, both Jarod and Paul bring up really good points, to Jarod's, I guess, state of the economy on his 5 bullet points. I mean, I don't think he's far off from the stuff that I'm seeing. And, I think there's some real, you could be set up for an environment that's real for what he's pointing out that are risks out there. Whether that comes to fruition or not, it's anybody's guess and things can turn around. But I think that, those are the biggest risks that we're seeing right now is, a little bit of a, and I think that, we've got erosion of working capital, we've got asset values that are declining, we've got tight margins, all of those things that as Jarod says, we, make the renewal a little bit harder. Probably for this upcoming renewal season than that has been in a while. And to Paul's point, we do have some, borrowers, I think that are financially strong that have, purchased equipment through the line that, are going to, look to term it out. And you're probably right, Paul, the asset values aren't there. Maybe they can, they can put about 80% of that purchase price, into a, long-term debt structure. There's 20% that needs to be chewed through for operations or cash injection or, some form of risk mitigation in next year's, cash flow. So all those, I think, pose challenges for this upcoming renewal for sure.
I guess.
I feel like running the situation of the boy that cried wolf.
Yeah.
That maybe it's not this year. Maybe it's one more year if things stay really, really tight. But, just from what you hear on the street, in essence, and all of us obviously talk to a lot of different farms. I mean, I can rattle off a few different bank situations that, not picking on a bank, just sharing what they've shared. One of your largest, what do you want to call it, community banks in the state of Iowa, a loan officer pretty much told us point blank that 1/3 of their operating notes will not be renewed without restructuring some long-term debt, as of things how they sit today. Another very large financial institution has been actively for the last month training all of their underwriters and their loan officers how they intend on handling tighter balance sheets this fall. And then in turn also, I've heard the comments be thrown around that chattel appraisals are going to start going through the roof. Because I think that's one of the pieces that's maybe going to sneak up on individuals is we're all talking about this decline in asset values and decline of working capital so fast. It almost seems like in the last couple months, the drop in the equipment side is something that we've never seen before. And you don't have to look very far to look at all the John Deere layoffs, the Case layoffs, so on and so forth, that it just, it looks like a deal that, okay, here's all my numbers. How am I going to make it work? And it's like the bank is only going to have so many options of what they can do. But again, the boy that cried wolf, this isn't everybody. This is maybe that, I don't want to use the word bottom. That sounds pretty discriminatory there, but your bottom 20-30% of US ag production. And maybe it's going to be a little geographical. Maybe it's tied to the extremities of the Corn Belt. But one of my first bosses in the industry told me a phrase about the farmer that has always stuck with me. They're going to spend the money that they make. The average farmer is going to spend the money that they make. And there's a clear disconnect recently that we're spending it before we're actually making that money to come in.
Jared, you made a interesting comment there, and let's get Jeremy's take on this on depreciating assets. We've seen in the last 4 years a 36.5% inflationary impact on new equipment, from which people were updating from 20 to 20, let's say 23, and then that's kind of shut off now. But we saw a ton of equipment being bought as that inflationary impact was occurring. And then back to what you said, we saw a lot of people change how they market. They're marketing on the back end instead of the front end of the marketing window, which is caught up to everything now. What's your take on that, Jeremy, based on what Jared's saying, as far as the difficulty of renewing some of these? What things do producers need to be doing, both the ones that are kind of in the middle, because I don't think we have a lot of people on here probably that are in that bottom, third that Jared's talking about. I think we're speaking right now to those in the top, half anyway, probably of listeners here. What do they need to be doing? What things do they need to have ready when they come to you? Or maybe they need to be coming to their banker now and having these conversations instead of waiting until it's loan renewal time. What's your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think all points you just point out are positives. I think if you were to paint it with a broad brush of, what to expect, I would expect that this next renewal season is probably going to take a little longer. There's going to be a little bit more due diligence on the bank side, probably, as things get tight. Does that mean we're going to ask for an equipment appraisal, land appraisal. I don't know. A lot of it depends on your situation and how you need to be restructured and things of that sort. But I think you could probably, say that this renewal process potentially could be longer and more expensive with some of the, additional valuations that banks will probably lean on as this gets tighter. And to that point, I guess it's probably, it's really behoove you to come in earlier. And especially if you've got, this is something that we always talk about the banking industry that, I know, human nature, it just doesn't work like this. But if you have a problem going on in your operation, get in quicker. I mean, it's so much easier to do to work with this, as it's coming to light versus, February 15th, you're coming in saying, hey, I got March 1st rents that are due and we have no time. I mean, that's really, really hard to work with. If you got a problem, you got a ton of time, whether you're a combine operator, you watch the grain operation at home or whatever your role in the operation is that if you have the time to be thinking about this, and you got time to be, putting some bullet points together and getting it in front of a banker during the harvest season. If this is coming down, I mean, that's the time to start engaging that conversation so that we can put a plan together that does make sense.
Jeremy, on the land side, let's say that a farmer, has a decent amount of land, is the bank more likely to maybe do lower loan to value than in the past because they're concerned that pricing or value of land might be going down? Is that a trend that you think might be starting here?
Yeah, I think, if you go back to when we came off that super cycle, we saw banks do, they kind of did one of two things, as the land values went up. And, I remember, we talked about 350 bucks an acre, rent being high and, 10,000, an acre purchases being high, at that time frame. And that was kind of a run up in coming off that super cycle. And, what banks, I think banks were in one of two categories. They either, they may have been aggressive at, let's just say, 75% loan to value. And they, because of the land values, they were potentially worried about a bubble or some kind of, appreciation that would turn into a decline. Maybe they reduced that from 75 to 65%. So we saw a lot of that where they adjusted what, their loan to value percentages were. The other thing I saw in addition to that was land value caps, and so, if they didn't do the adjustment on the, loan to value side of it, what they did was they capped the value that what they were going to lend against. And so, for example, during that time frame, if it was, $11,000 purchase price on some land, they were willing to lend up to about $8,000, an acre. And so they put either land caps or did that. At this point in time, Paul, I haven't seen a lot of that being the case. There's still a pretty, there's still a lot of buyers in the market for land, that I think isn't, really pushing this land value decline so much. I see it more in, obviously chattel assets, machinery, that type of stuff. See it in special use properties. If you're wanting to sell off like a 4-acre grain site, that's a storage facility, farrowing buildings, sow units, things of that sort that have some special use. I think that's where we're seeing some pressure on some value declines. But raw, farmland that's producing, there's a lot of buyers in there. So not to say it can't happen because we all know it can. I just don't, at this point in time, that price pressure isn't there like it is in some of the other areas of the ag sector I see.
Well, and Jarod, if we have cash rents that are elevated next March, likely they're not going to come down that much. It's really the following March that we're probably going to see cash rents coming down, aren't we? I mean, isn't there typically at least a year lag on seeing those rents come down?
A lot of times,
3-year lag, 3-year lag.
It takes a while.
Some of those conversations have already came up, and I just told some guys to get to the negotiation table just so the other side of it sees maybe how drastic the revenue has dropped. Is simply take established cash rent last year divided by whatever price corn was for new crop the day you established that rent, and do that exact same practice at today's, and just show, hey, here's how many additional bushels an acre it's going to take to cover your cash rent, and that's eaten into the balance of all my other costs. I thought Jeremy brought up something interesting that, maybe shouldn't say interesting, but the way of human life, you got a problem, like he was saying, a lot of people want to avoid it. So now you're talking about maybe an impact for the good and the bad individuals here, that the bad, it might take a long time for everything to come to a head at the bank. And that all of a sudden leaves a situation that has a growth opportunity of possibly bringing in more ground into the operation in the 9th inning going into next spring's planting. And that can create a little bit of windfalls as well. So I almost now think about, hey, we got two different considerations, both with the accountant and with the banker to consider this winter. What do I need to be considering to forecast maybe picking up that additional 5% of ground, maybe that additional 10% of ground? And I can just, off the top of my head here, I can think of two different things of obviously working with a banker, knowing what I'm going to need for working capital to accomplish that, whether I'm renting or buying. And then on the backside, Paul, what do guys need to be possibly considering around nutrient programs and the possibilities of stepping into ground that has already had fall fertilizer applications or spring fertilizer applications, and what type of impact back and forth do you think we should be considering there?
Well, and also I think there might be some collaboration opportunities where, you're a strong producer and there's somebody else that maybe is not as strong or getting near to retirement. Start having those conversations now to see if that's something where you can make 1 + 1 = 3, so to speak. So I think those opportunities are going to be even more prevalent now than they were the last couple of years.
I 100% agree, Paul, because, to Jared's point, I mean, we saw that's almost the exact same thing that I saw. I would say it was probably around that 14, 15 timeframe in the last, downturn. Is it, at the last minute, ground came up. Producers were coming in and Chris and I talked a little bit about this on the 19 minutes we did. Producers came in and they said, I'm able to pick up another $500-600, or 500-600 acres, sometimes even as high as 1,000. And some of the banks were, they're nervous about that because they're nervous about how much working capital it takes. And so, some of those opportunities present themselves of getting some, efficiencies. If you don't have to hire more people, you don't have to bring on more equipment, so you can actually lower some of your costs. So I think you need to talk through that aspect. But those are difficult situations where if you can partner and collaborate, I think that's a lot easier transition, and probably a lot better long-term solution of keeping that ground, and even, potentially leveraging, some other producers' working capital, whether that's, equity labor or equity machinery, those types of things. I mean, I think those are all points to consider, for the producer that's set to grow. You need to be looking at, what's my, best way to grow into this. Because, again, another point that Chris and I made is that, we all look at this and we say, hey, we can look at trying to cut expenses. And there's a lot of efforts that can go along with trying to cut expenses, but, how do we grow the revenue side, or how do we get more efficient on that side too? And I think there's instead of just expense reduction cut, we got to figure out how to be more efficient in growing revenue or doing it at a better margin too. So yeah, I think to that point, I think there's a couple different challenges and some opportunities out there for this coming spring.
From a marketing aspect, if you have the optimism that you're going to have land opportunities come up, it can almost create a situation that you are more aggressive even earlier than you normally been in the past.
Yeah.
It's almost like a deal of, maybe you're making a little bit of bet on it come here, but being able to market something at a profitable level at a greater quantity that you normally would is going to make that decision to bring that ground in all that much easier versus the typical process of today's cash price versus this cost. No, it doesn't work. But if I've already accomplished XYZ ahead of time, and to your point, Jeremy, it's going to actually reduce some cost of production. There's a lot of different mental exercises that probably the proactive thinker will come out ahead in this.
Yeah.
And I would not be counting on a new farm bill to bail us out, not right now. So I'm pretty sure we're going to have the 24 farm bill is going to become the 25 farm bill, and then we'll have sometime next year we'll have a new farm bill, and it depends on the election too. So we'll see on that.
One of the things that, Jeremy, you mentioned that we're getting a ton of outreach on, and you were able to participate in one of the meetings, is the interest on collaboration and trying to figure out how to work together just to generate more revenue. The biggest challenge that I see in that area is whether or not people have their own business structure together and they have their own house in order, because it's easy to start working with somebody and create a cancer because the cultures are different and there can be some clashes and things. But I think done right, we've seen some huge advantages. The math is simple. I mean, if you take two people that have equipment that, they're oversized, and and can combine and right size the equipment fleet. It's the second largest line item expense. It's the one that we see that gets people in more trouble than anything. Jarod brought up, kind of what we've seen, and on the equipment side in 2015, we did see a big downturn in equipment fleets, and that impacted banks back then, where the balance sheets were too high and things. So I think, the collaboration is one thing. I just wanted to make that comment. The other one is, Paul, touch on the importance of understanding contribution margin, because I think it's just something that's noteworthy in this discussion when it comes to picking up those extra acres and understanding the math behind it, and just the high level perspective there, Paul.
Yeah, certainly, because sometimes people say, well, how in the world could that farmer pick up that land because it's high cost, the cash rent is high. Well, if they're not at fully utilizing their fleet and their labor, picking up that land doesn't create any extra costs related to labor, doesn't create any extra costs related to equipment. So, that land's generating, let's say, $1,000 of value or of revenue, but the variable costs, which is what we're interested in, the seed, the fertilizer, the cash rent, and so on, might only be $700. So that $300 per acre is dropping to the bottom line that helps reduce that fixed cost per acre. So just because you have high cost land, if you have excess capacity on both equipment and labor, that is some of the best land that you can pick up, because of the fact that you are dropping contribution margin to your bottom line. Anytime you have positive contribution margin, I'm not talking $20 an acre, because that could be too easy to go one way or another. But if you have $200-300 of contribution margin per acre, that is automatically going to go to your bottom line. So that's the type of opportunity you want to be looking at.
Mm-hmm. How many people come to you, Jeremy, with that data?
Very little, very little.
Uh-huh.
I think they do it sometimes in a roundabout way. I don't think they know it into that side of it. But there's a handful of producers that'll say, hey, I think my machinery cost is X. And they'll know that, if they can spread that out over 500 more acres, they can give me an opportunity of how it's better, utilized and how it reduces it. But, I don't know that they have really figured out how it hits the bottom line in the aspects that Paul just described.
Yeah, and sometimes the farmer says, okay, if I get that extra 500 acres, it drops my average machinery cost from, let's say, $150 per acre to $145, and they're still thinking they have that $145 cost. Well, they really don't. They're going to get that full amount down. Yes, it'll drop the average allocation, but what's important is how much is that extra 500 acres really dropping to the bottom line, and that's where they end up doing allocated costs, and that really doesn't tell you what that bottom line effect is really going to be.
We have that discussion quite a bit internally, that I think there's a fine line between the contribution margin on rented ground versus the contribution margin on purchased ground.
Yeah. Yes.
And at least in the last couple of years, I don't know if my attitude has really changed on this, that if a producer's going to quote unquote overpay for something on land, I would much rather still be doing it on a purchase side if they can swing it versus the rented side. Maybe way too many long-term opinions in there from land values, but it certainly seems to be a safer route currently. I mean, what's your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, you certainly have more control on the purchase side. Again, as long as you have that cushion, you want to have a little bit of a cushion. But, in the long term, it's very rare to go broke buying land, in the long term. Now, in the short term, it can be a little bit different. But, I agree. And again, sometimes they get caught up with the fact that, hey, our payment is X. Well, part of that payment is principal. It's really a savings account. Your net worth is actually going up. So don't get so hung up on what your payment is. It's really what is your true cost of that land.
Yeah, and I would say too, and this is I think what makes sometimes agriculture tough within the bank versus a CNI or a commercial type businesses, agriculture has a 12 to 18 month business cycle, versus, somebody that's, producing widgets or plating screws, may have a 30 to 45 day, maybe 60-day business cycle. So, you get one business cycle in the course of a year versus potentially, 8 to 12. And so on the purchase side, to Jared's point on the purchase side, I feel like, you've got a lot better opportunity to control long-term risk management. You've got a lot better opportunity to build, kind of your business model. If you go out on a limb, for high cash rent, what's the probability that somebody, behind you is going to be able to, take it away from you for another $20 an acre, at some point, if you had to, grow into that with, another full-time employee, or you've done something, from that standpoint of expansion, and it's gone, that hurts you. Where if you purchase it, you can control that long-term risk management way better on the purchase side than the rent side.
So to make it really, really scary here for a moment, Jeremy, your opinion from the bank level, general US acres, is there any type of forced liquidation on land auctions that could arise this winter from some of these distressed balance sheets?
I don't know that it's going to be in a massive scale. It's not going to be like it certainly was in some of the 80s time frame. But I do believe that there's going to be some producers that might be over leveraged, that are going to have to, they're going to have to get some of that equity back out through the, through a sale. One of the things that I kind of had in my bullet points, and if you kind of go back to the working capital, if you don't have working capital, one of the only ways, to get it is to harvest that equity. Well, if you harvest that equity, you're doing, a couple different things. You're increasing your leverage, and you're also increasing the annual debt service coverage ratio. And does that even really work within today's or to next year's projected cash flows? And if the answer to all of that is no, then you might have to sell a 40 here and an 80 there to recapitalize and get some cash back in, just because you can't make it work on the cash flow side and support the additional debt. So I think you're going to see a little bit of that, but it may not be as quite widespread as it has been, in the 80s timeframes. But there's going to be some people that are probably going to have to make that move to stay alive if they're willing to do so.
I think there's more buyers out there to do what I call sale leasebacks. They'll find somebody that wants to buy the land, and the farmer knows, hey, I got a 5 or 10 year long-term lease on that ground. Now, there's other farmers, probably not the farmers on this call, but there's really other farmers that really should be looking at just liquidating the operation. I mean, they have some equity. It's a tough decision, but they really need to say, hey, I should just liquidate this, get my $1 million of equity, and go do something else. So, those are tough decisions, but, I've seen too many farms that just hang on, and suddenly the equity is gone, and, you have a Chapter 12 liquidation, or could be Chapter 12, or they just liquidate it. So that's something that, that I'm concerned about. And again, you look at the 24 price, Jared, go back to 2014, they are eerily similar. So, we're in that situation where we had a little bit of a supply shock with Russia and Ukraine, and that's dissipated. But in the meantime, we still have high input costs.
I'd have to go back and fact check this, but I was told something interesting last week that farmer said, well, last time corn was $3.75, I survived just fine. Problem is, last time corn was $3.75, their purchasing power was exactly, our purchasing power today is exactly half of what it was then.
Yep. And that's the concern.
I want to have you guys talk about, excuse me, some opportunities. Again, anything else that you can think of, kind of like how Jared started the conversation, let's think about the top third of these operations that are here that are financially solid, that have, stayed current, Paul, on their taxes, They haven't bulldozed too much of it forward. Everybody does some, but haven't done too much of that, and they're in a solid position. Start with you, Jeremy. They're not going to take as long to do their loan renewal and that type of thing, but how far are you going to go with them? What are you going to encourage them to do? What do those producers need to be thinking about when they do loan renewals and when they look at the opportunities? How aggressive do they get?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that come to mind on my side. I'm kind of a fan of prepaids where it makes sense, and especially if you're buying some inputs that we know we need to have, whether it's a seed, fertilizer, I want to get something too that's a saleable item that you can, take a unit or something on rather than just giving a blank check to a co-op. But if you could, if you can if there's a seed company offering a, 10 to 12, 15%, early pay discount that, you don't have to borrow that on the line. You can pay that, you can turn around and get, some fairly decent, forward pricing strategy on that. I think you can really reduce some costs doing that. I think those moves might be out there. We've been doing it quite a bit in the past, but we've been doing it with, 4, 5, 6% money, borrowing it on the line. I think that, those days are gone. You need to be looking at it with cash rather than borrowed. One of the things that I think is really overlooked is it just diversifying your own operation. I mean, if you're in the top third and you've got plenty of working capital, you got plenty of cash, plenty of equity, and you're wanting to know what makes sense. A lot of times, look at the opportunity cost of where we're at, with interest rates as well, and whether you go out and buy equipment or you invest that into a different, type of strategy that whether it's a CD or something that's giving you a little bit more. I mean, those opportunities are out there too. And so, if you broaden your mind a little bit, that it doesn't always have to go 100% back into the farm, it can go elsewhere to help set you up. I think those are strategies as well, and getting in front of a good, tax professional and financial professional that understands ag to help kind of look at what your needs are there. And then the other thing, I've seen a lot of successful producers, to this point of the lease sale back and a bunch of buyers out there. I've seen a lot of diversity in some producers that have been really, really successful at buying land in different regions and letting, from a farmer and letting that farmer continue to farm it. And so, there's a different income stream too. And so if you want to increase your equity land base and, go on shares or let somebody else do that, and I think those opportunities are there too. If you don't want to get into war and you're, in your backyard, maybe there's a land purchase that's, 50 miles away that, the grower, and you're able to buy that, diversify your portfolio, let them farm it. Those types of things. I think that looking a little outside the box at how you can grow and diversify your revenue are great opportunities to look at this point. Because I think we're in my area, there's a ton of, if land comes up, I would bet you there's 100 bids that go in on it. And so, instead of fighting those 100 bids, let's get creative as to where our opportunities really are.
Paul, comments on next steps for these top producers?
Yeah, I think, and again, having good financials is great, but I also think this is a people business, and I think being a good neighbor, being somebody that can look at the opportunities out there, that maybe you have a farmer, a neighbor that's struggling, be a friend to them. Maybe, that might lead to something down the road. So again, like I say, if you bring rent up or ground up for rent, you're going to have 100 bidders. But if you see that operation, hey, this might be an opportunity, be a friend to them. Don't be a vulture, be a friend to them. And that's something that, may not pay immediate return, but it certainly is probably the best return, in my opinion.
What about anything on the tax side of things that you're concerned about, or that these producers need to be paying attention to? Anything there?
Well, again, I want to make sure that farmers, even in bad times, they need to optimize the tax. They need to pay some tax. You need to take advantage of, like I say, that 12% bracket. That's about $150,000 of tax we're not going to see that probably after the next year or so. So the key is to pay some tax. You know, if you know times are bad, this is times to start liquidating some of that excess grain. It'll make the banker happy, and you're able to do it at a very low tax cost. So again, convert that to cash, convert it to working capital that's really yours, not the bank's or Uncle Sam. So that's certainly a recommendation I would have.
Internally here, Pete Meyer and I, we have been discussing this for months now, that it seems like liquidity, you know, the farmer needing to be liquid. That's a lot different than having 80% of a crop of inventory in a bin.
Yeah.
The other piece that I think is it's probably a whole nother discussion outside of this one, but it kind of corresponds with this, is we're talking about these farms that they'll survive this no matter what. Whatever this possible downturn is, they're going to be fine. But it might be more of an elder generation that has the next generation up and coming. And there can be land deals that come about that should be done, but the elder generation does not want to purchase any more ground.
Right.
Like I said, that's a whole nother gamut. And we've had some success in the last year or two of gently business minded, kindly forcing that elder generation out, letting them see the greener pasture of get this to the next of kin. The next of kin has the ability now to keep the farm legacy going in the right direction, but it cannot be done without that transition taking place first.
Yeah.
And so maybe, you know, that's not my expertise. Maybe that's a Chris and Paul or whoever. This might be as good as time as any for some of these transitions within these family operations to happen as well. I mean, I'm just thinking of one farm in Western Iowa, two brothers and their dad. They farm about 9,000 acres total, and they've been renting their dad's ground for the last 4 years, 5 years. The dad finally stopped wanting to buy ground. Well, now it's time to hang it up. And don't be afraid to transition the debt that you still have on a lot of this ground to the younger generation, especially if you can just transfer that interest rate from the refinances done several years ago to that next of kin and across their entire operation, absorbing, I don't know, call it $7 million of debt across 30 million land valuation. You know, it still reduced their overall land costs from what they were paying for rent versus today by about $30 an acre contribution margin, Paul. I mean,
Yeah,
the
and again,
ability within a family to make it happen as well.
And again, from a state tax standpoint, the last thing you want to do is have that generation, the older generation, buy anything more, because that's just going to cost the next generation 40%. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and Jarod, I think you make a good point too, is that, one of the things that, I think business finance is different than personal finance. And there's a lot of times where, that generation's hanging on thinking that they have to hand off a paid for farm,
Yep.
to the next generation. And, if that does happen, a lot of the times it's the farm that time forgot. There isn't expansion, there isn't, upgrade of CapEx and things of that sort. So yeah, this isn't personal finance where you want to retire debt free on the farm. There's probably an acceptable amount of debt that needs to go with it. And don't be afraid to do that.
Correct.
I want to come back to the liquidity thing for a second with you guys and Jarod more specifically here with respect to marketing. We haven't spent much time on marketing. I want to hit on that for a minute. I just had a conversation with Joe Vaklovic on the idea of carry. We all look at, what's the carry from Dece to March or May or whatever, July, and what can we capture there? And I think a lot of times what is forgotten or what's not thought about is the cost of carry. What's it costing you to carry it? You got the interest cost, you've got storage cost, whether you think you do or you don't, you do, because those grain bins and the facilities and the handling equipment and all that crap needs to be replaced at some point. It doesn't last forever, even though you're not making payments on it. You still have a cost. There is also another category in that to manage liquidity or to create liquidity is this thing called opportunity cost.
Yep.
And a lot of times there's producers that, and we talked about this at the beginning of the conversation, where people have a lot of, or not a lot, but they're sitting on cash, and so they don't become very good salespeople. You know, they're not very good at marketing because, well, I've got cash, I'm pretty comfortable right now, I don't need to sell. And there's some subconscious things that go on in our decision making in the back of our mind that cause us to not make the decision to sell because we feel comfortable. There's a cost there, and I have a tool. If anybody wants it, just email me, I'll send it to you, where you can go through and figure out what your cost of carry is. And what we're seeing a lot of times is the carry is almost never enough when you look at opportunity cost, because you can turn around, especially now. That was different back in 14 because we didn't have as high of interest rates. So we've got kind of a double whammy. We've got higher interest rates, and we also have more opportunity cost. And you combine those two, you know, you're looking at 12, 13%, and we don't get that much carry in the market, you know. On the other hand, though, and this goes to you, Paul, and then I'm going to shut up and let you guys talk about this, but there are some tax implications to that too, though, because, you know, you're bringing the money in quicker. So then you do have some tax implications unless you're doing it through a cash system where you can, you know, defer the payment and that kind of thing. So I'm going to stop there and take your 2 cents on this comment first, Jarod, and then we'll catch you.
Well, Jarod, I just want to ask Jarod one quick question. You know, people talk about carry, but if you're not locking in the carry, really, aren't you still just speculating? I mean, carry only means something if you lock it in. Otherwise, you're still speculating. So
you rewind a calendar 2 years ago, there was no carry, not in corn, not in soybeans. It was all inverted.
Yeah.
And 2 years ago, I'd have to go back and look, but I'm guessing interest rates 2 years ago were maybe not half of what they were today, but
close,
not too far off.
Close.
So now you look at this last year, the crop that might still be in the bin from 23 harvest. There was a carry on the board. There was a modest carry in the cash market, but net of interest, the market was still inverted.
Yeah.
And I just happened to, I had to see if the spreadsheet was still on my desktop here. I mean, these are kind of some sickly numbers. Looking at 13 1/4 soybeans, October 1st of 2023, to carry them until July at 8.5% interest expense, 5.5 cents a month of storage. You were looking at about $1.50 to get there based upon a 13 1/4 bean. And then when you talk about the opportunity cost that Jeremy was referencing earlier, you know, outside agriculture investment, you know, you go get 5% on a CD, maybe pretty modest. You can go ahead and tack on another 55 cents a bushel there. So you're talking about $2 a bushel or greater from Oct 1 to present day. And, you know, in that exact same math on corn, 82 cents a bushel for storage and interest, and add in another 19 cents a bushel from going and earning 5% on that possible cash. That opportunity cost turns into over $1 a bushel, and it obviously has not helped what the market has done since then. So you look at a carry or lack thereof, cash corn October 1, $4.60. What would I need today to offset all that from the opportunity side? I need $5.60 corn. And that's just not the environment that we're in. And arguably, you know, just adjust these numbers again. I guess I don't know if this will work, but yeah, I put $4 corn in the bin this October, and I pay in that interest, and I could still go earn 5%. Now all of a sudden, I need $1 a bushel carry out to July. Yeah. Opportunity expense, or I need 78 cents a bushel out to July. The farmer needs to realize that net of interest today and liquidity, again, the point of bringing this up is that there is no carry. You can have extreme basis appreciation over time, but now to both you and Paul and Chris's point, you're betting on to come. If you haven't sold the carry, now you're completely just gambling that price is going to go higher. Yeah. But if you're at least trying to lock in a carry on the board, you're betting on to come on basis. But in all reality, you're not able to look at saying, I'm going to sell cash grain today for July of 2025 delivery of what I'm going to harvest this fall. That's not going to be a moneymaker for you. Yeah. There's other things that come into it. I get it. Logistics, what you can and can't do. But one of the things that's maybe saved our bacon in the last couple of years is just taking a breath for a second and realizing what that interest expense was and getting everything we could possibly have moved as fast as possible. And now you got guys in the summertime says, I don't have anything for my help to do because you moved all the grain from October to March. Now what? Well, that saved you a hell of a lot of money not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. That interest is more than the wages you might have to pay the employees.
Correct.
Plus you have liquidity. So,
Yep. And even if we're talking about, okay, earning 5%, let's just say it's your biggest lender in the US, you know, your farm credit system on cash plus, what, 2.5%, 3% today? I might be a tad high there, but that's still money earned versus paying it back to the bank. And all of a sudden you got about a 10% swing there. And that's a meaningful amount of money on an annualized basis when you're spending the amount of money we're spending today.
yeah. A farmer should never root for a carry market because it means it's a crappy market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
don't root for that.
the other thing too is, you know, there are liquid accounts out there, you know, not advertising for Vanguard, but like as an example, you know, that's a liquid account that you can take that money in and out the same day. And last time I checked, as of the 29th of July recording this, they're at about 5.25%. They're a little over 5%, and you can move that money in and out the same day. So it's not like you're tying it up for 6 months and you're like, well, I'm going to be on line of credit that's going to offset it. Well, there's other tools that you can use too and really benefit you. Comments, Jeremy or Paul, on the liquidity thing, and then we'll kind of get to wrapping this up.
It's like,
go ahead,
Jeremy.
Paul. All right, well, I'll just take it, you know, to Jared's point of all of the benefits of, you know, getting this sold in Paul's as well. You know, the other side of it is that, you know, it's always a lot easier, I think, from a banking side. If you go into your renewal, you know, and you're not speculative or betting on the come, you know, you can get that renewal done, you know, a lot easier as well. So we all know that, you know, we've all outlined the opportunity cost, but, you know, what's the headache cost, you know, of going through a tough renewal, you know, not having some solutions out there for you. If you get some of this sold, you get it locked up, you got some future sales, and you're not betting on the come, or storing it, holding it in a bin, and losing out not only on the opportunity cost, the interest expense, the storage, but it's going to make your life a lot harder at renewal time too, because there's too much uncertainty. So I think that, you know, you need to take a look at some of that as well.
Yeah. Liquidity is like oil in an engine. You know, you really can't have too much. I mean, you maybe could, but once you run out, your engine stops. And that's the same with a farm operation. If you have way too little liquidity, you're basically toast.
And the farmer, you know, they're going to get caught up on, well, the only way for it to be cash is I have to sell it. And I have this hunch or opinion that markets are undervalued. Go use the tools that every single North America producer, grain elevator, processor, so on and so on. Everybody has access to the same tools. Go use it.
Yeah.
Go use it.
Yeah.
So I think this has been a great conversation, just so we don't go super long. I think this is probably a conversation that maybe we should reconvene as we get closer and get into fourth quarter and kind of see maybe where the yields are at and where things are, how things are going, where interest rates are at. You know, there's an election coming up this year that looks interesting. It seems like there's new news every 10 minutes and just things to pay attention to. What I'd like to do to kind of wrap up here, and I'll start with Paul, and then we'll go to Jared, and then, or excuse me, Paul, Jared, and then Jeremy to wrap up kind of any takeaways, any final comments to producers. What do they need to be thinking about as we head towards harvest? And again, you know, we're optimistic here. There's going to be, you know, kind of like Jared said in the very beginning, I think there's going to be some distressed operations. We can do like you did, like you said, Paul, we can be a good neighbor. We can try to help some of these people, work with them, create some opportunities. I think collaboration, there's all kinds of things that can be done to make this a good, this challenge an opportunity. And so with that said, I'll start with you, Paul, and have you give us your takeaway, last few words here.
Yeah, I think that most of the people on this call are the ones that are going to be able to take advantage of opportunities. And this is a time not to be a speculator. This is the time to be the business person that banks their liquidity, so to speak, and then take advantage of it.
Jared.
Yeah, I hope I'm not stepping on Jeremy's toes here, what he mentioned earlier, but I think one of the most important pieces is timeliness in all this, whether you're in a good situation or a bad situation. And it's not just at the bank. It's also with the accountant, a mid-year tax review. And if you've made a lot of money the last couple of years, you maybe have found yourself, let's just say you carried margin protection last year as well. You had this big check come in the middle of the year that you need to start thinking about what income can I or can I not take going into the end of the year from the accountant perspective. Then go sit down with the banker and say, what money can I actually spend? And really try to tighten in on that last 3 months of expenses. That it's kind of a pet peeve of mine too at today's interest rates, that I deliver all this grain and I'll tell the elevator, I'll get with you after harvest to see what money I want. Why? Why? Get your money that you know you can take now.
Yeah.
And then if you need to make some adjustments the last 30, 45 days of the year, so be it. But that takes a team around you to make sure that you're dotting the I's, crossing the T's with both the bank, both the accountant, and maybe it's even what Jeremy was talking about too, of finding some of those prepaid discounts if your financial situation allows you to do so. But don't wait until that time comes. You need to have an idea before you even think about putting the first head on a combine of what money you can actually take in through harvest.
Jeremy.
Yeah, well, Jared stole both Paul and Jared stole my thunder on that, all of that. So I don't have
You always want to be the first. You always want to be the first.
Exactly. I don't have a lot to say. I'll just echo everybody's sentiments. And I think that, from a lending perspective, I think everybody, if you've got opportunities that you're thinking coming up, get in early, talk to them. If you got problems, that you think are on the horizon, get in early, talk to them. The more you can communicate with all of the business partners that you're working with, the better off your operation's going to be.
I'm sorry, I have one last thing I wanted to add in there to kind of, for the good guys here, to maybe have those opportunities that land might be coming up, especially if it's for sale. If you get your due diligence done now at the bank, that bank, it might not even be tied to a particular piece of ground that you're looking at today, but they might just give you your old-fashioned, like a real estate pre-approval letter. Yeah. In the next 6 months, based upon the information that we have, you got $1 million to go spend if an opportunity comes up. That's a lot different and a lot more confident decision to be made than, oh, now I got to rush to the banker to see if I can actually do this and stress the family out, stress yourself out, so on and so on. Know what you can do ahead of time if those opportunities come up.
All right. Great advice, great comments, great takeaways. I think we kind of covered the gamut, kind of speaking to everybody in the ag industry and getting some thoughts and some perspective out there. And I definitely think we'll have to get this team back together again as we get toward, kind of into harvest aways, or kind of where we know how things are really looking. What the USDA tells us and what's actually going to happen will probably be slightly two different things, and demand. And there's just a lot of things out here that we're going to have to pay attention to, some math to do in the meantime. With that said, Jared, really appreciate your time. Paul, appreciate your time. And Jeremy, thank you very much to all you guys. I think this has been a great conversation. And if anybody has comments and stuff, this will be on YouTube. This will be also obviously on our podcast, the AgView Pitch. So if you guys have anything that you have questions on, want to reach out to these guys, reach out to me, let us know. And if there's other things topics you want us to hit on, let us know that as well. With that said, thanks everybody, and we will catch you again next time on the AgView Pitch.